I thought I knew exactly how my weekend was going to go. 3 quiet days helping my best friend choose a wedding venue. Ocean views. Too much champagne. Nothing complicated. Then my ex checked into the same resort. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd moved on. I was happy. Besides, Kwang-su was hundreds of miles away in Atlanta. Looking back, I should have realized the weekend was never going to stay that simple. Because the next morning, I walked into breakfast, looked toward the terrace, and completely forgot how to breathe. I'm going away. Kwang-su immediately stopped scrolling, his dark eyes lifting from the lit screen of his tablet. Away? I try to keep the mischievous smile off my lips. Don't look so alarmed. It's only 3 nights, not 3 months. I don't look alarmed, he said, his voice flat, though his brow gave a tiny, imperceptible twitch. You completely stopped reading. He glanced down at the financial report on his screen, then back up at me, entirely unbothered by being caught. Where are you going? Martha's Vineyard. That earned another deliberate pause. We were curled up together on the deep velvet sofa in his living room after dinner. My legs were stretched comfortably across his lap, my bare feet tucked beside his hip while he'd been reviewing quarterly security audits, and I'd been scrolling through the endless flood of high-resolution venue photos Biddy had been spamming my phone with all afternoon. It's Biddy and Eric, I explained, tilting my screen toward him. They're locking in their wedding location. I thought Lisa was going with them. So did Lisa. I held up my phone, shaking it slightly. Until approximately 4 hours ago, when some corporate crisis exploded at her firm and obliterated her entire weekend. Literally. No. Good. Although judging by the dramatic voice note she sent me, you'd think the building actually caught fire. Kwang-su didn't say anything, but his large thumb began to move absently over my ankle, slow, tracing light, soothing circles against my warm skin. The casual, automatic touch sent a gentle shiver straight up my leg. So Biddy called me in an absolute panic. I continued, leaning back into the cushions. They're staying at the resort for 3 nights to test out the full package before committing. Menu tasting, ceremony locations, private beach activities, the whole extravagant ordeal. Who's attending? Biddy, Eric, another couple from their circle, one of Eric's groomsmen, and now me. He gave a slow nod. Which resort? The Asta Cove. Immediate recognition flickered in his dark eyes. I stared at him, raising an eyebrow. You know it? I've stayed there, he said smoothly. Of course you have. Twice. Of course you've stayed twice. A faint, lethal smile touched the corner of his mouth. It's a beautiful property. High privacy standards. That's what Biddy keeps screaming into my ear. The eastern lawn is superior for evening ceremonies, Kwang-su noted casually, his thumb still stroking my ankle. I frowned, leaning forward slightly. You've apparently given wedding logistics some serious thought. The western terrace is far too exposed to the coastal wind. I let out a bright laugh. I'm absolutely telling Biddy that so Kwang-su has strong opinions about coastal wedding venues. I don't. You literally just recommended a specific ceremony lawn. I made an architectural observation. That's an opinion. It isn't. It completely is. He gave me that dark, lingering look, the one that usually meant he had decided I was being delightfully ridiculous and enjoyed every second of it. I offered him a sweet, innocent smile in return. For a moment, quiet settled over the room, warm and heavy. As I watched him, a realization quietly struck me. That was it. He hadn't demanded a reason why I needed to go. He hadn't interrogated me about who else was attending. He hadn't suggested Biddy find someone else so I could stay home with him. He had simply asked where I was going, and immediately began offering property insights to ensure I had a good time. It shouldn't have felt so extraordinary. But after 10 long years of walking on eggshells, anticipating moods, and managing someone else's fragile ego before daring to make a plan for myself, experiencing Kwang-su's calm, effortless security still made my heart ache in the best way possible. I nudged his hip gently with my foot. You're not going to miss me at all? Kwang-su's eyes slowly lifted from his tablet, locking straight onto mine with heat that made my breath catch. Very much, he murmured. A helpless smile broke across my face before I could stop it. Very much? Yes. You don't sound particularly devastated. Would you prefer I forbid you from leaving? I laughed softly, shifting on the sofa. I'd love to see you try. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. Enjoy your weekend, Nessa. I uncurled my legs from his lap and slid closer, tucking myself right into his side. Kwang-su's large arm lifted automatically, wrapping firmly around my waist, pulling me back against his broad, warm chest until I was wrapped in a scent. Sandalwood, clean rain, and pure heat. I will, I whispered against his neck. And tell Biddy about the eastern lawn. I looked up at his sharp jawline, smiling. I knew you cared about her wedding. I don't. Of course not. I leaned up, pressing a warm kiss to the underside of his jaw, feeling the heavy pulse beneath his skin. Kwang-su tried to turn his attention back to his tablet. Keyword, tried. His grip around my waist tightened, just a fraction, keeping me glued against his body. 3 nights? He repeated softly, his voice dropping into a low rumble. I smiled against his shoulder, closing my eyes as his thumb began tracing light patterns over my hip. 3 nights. A quiet, heavy sigh escaped him, his cheek coming down to rest lightly against my hair. I giggled softly to myself. Apparently, the terrifying, unshakable CEO was going to miss me after all. Clay still owned the same club. Different name. Different sign outside. Same business underneath. I walked through the empty main floor just after 2 in the afternoon, past rows of dark booths and a dance floor that wouldn't come alive for another 8 hours. The place still smelled faintly of liquor and cleaning chemicals. Clay was waiting upstairs. He stood behind the desk in his private office, looking older than I remembered. Graying at the temples, a little thicker around the middle. Then again, so was I. 5 years, he said. 5 years. He came around the desk and pulled me into a brief hug. Good to see you out, Rico. Good to be out. He poured 2 drinks without asking. Some things didn't change. I took the chair opposite his desk. Clay handed me a glass. So? He sat down. What brings you here? Teddy. His expression changed. Just slightly. That told me he'd already heard something. My son tells me he had some trouble here a few months ago. Clay leaned back. I heard. He says somebody assaulted him. Clay said nothing. Forced him to drink something. Still nothing. Humiliated him in front of half the club. Clay finally sighed. That's Teddy's version. That's Teddy's version. And you believe him? I took a slow sip. I raised him. That earned the smallest smile. Teddy had always possessed a remarkable ability to leave out whichever part of a story made Teddy look like an asshole. When he was 12, another boy had broken his nose for absolutely no reason. 3 days later, I discovered Teddy had spent an entire week bullying the kid's younger brother. At 17, he'd been unfairly suspended from school. Apparently setting fire to somebody's backpack hadn't seemed relevant enough to mention. So no, I didn't believe I'd heard the entire story. But that wasn't why I was sitting there. Whatever Teddy did, I said, somebody put my son on the floor in a club owned by an old friend of mine. Clay's expression hardened. Careful, Rico. I looked at him. I didn't say you did it. No, but you're saying it happened in my house, so I owe you something. You do. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. I checked. And? Nothing. I frowned. Nothing. The cameras covering that section of the club went down. Convenient. Very. Get the backup. Gone. I stared at him. Clay took a drink. Everything from that section of the system was scrubbed. By who? If I knew that, we wouldn't be having this conversation. What about witnesses? Plenty. Good. Not really. I waited. Clay leaned forward. My people started asking questions after Teddy came around looking for answers. And? Nobody saw anything. I gave him a flat look. A packed nightclub and nobody saw anything. Exactly. So they're scared. Some of them. Of Teddy? Clay laughed once. No. That caught my attention. Then who? He didn't answer immediately. I set my glass down. What do you know? Not much. Tell me what you do know. He rubbed a hand slowly across his jaw. Black woman. Late 30s maybe. Attractive. Nessa. Teddy gave you her name? Yeah. Clay nodded. Then her. And the man? Korean. Name? No. Who was he with? Her. I mean, who does he work for? I don't know. Who does he run with? I don't know. I frowned. Clay. I'm telling you, Rico. I don't know. Some Korean guy walks into your club, puts Teddy on his ass, wipes your security footage and scares an entire room into forgetting what they saw. I leaned back. And nobody knows who the hell he is? Clay's face remained completely serious. That's about the size of it. I laughed. He didn't. That bothered me more than I wanted it to. Come on. I'm serious. Triads? No. Korean crew? No. Somebody out of New York? Not that I can find. Then what? Clay looked toward the closed office door. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. There are stories. I stared at him. What kind of stories? The kind you don't repeat unless you trust who you're talking to. I've known you 30 years. I know. So talk. He sat back. A few people have heard rumors about an organization. What organization? Nobody knows. I almost laughed again. Clay didn't give me the chance. No name. No crew. No territory. Nothing. Then what exactly have they heard? That every now and then somebody in our world crosses a line with the wrong person. And things happen. What things? People disappear from businesses they thought they controlled. Accounts suddenly become inaccessible. Deals collapse. Police show up knowing exactly where to look. Men who spent 20 years keeping their mouths shut suddenly decide cooperation is good for their health. I stared at him. You're describing half the criminals in America. No. Clay shook his head. I'm describing something that doesn't operate like us. Meaning? No territory. He counted them off slowly. No drugs. No girls. No gambling. No protection money. No street soldiers anybody can identify. Then how do you even know it's an organization? We don't. Exactly. That's the problem. He looked me straight in the eye. Nobody knows what it is. Silence settled between us. Then Clay said quietly, if it's who I think it might be. He paused. Forget it. I almost smiled. Who? I just told you. No, you told me ghost stories. I'm telling you what I've heard. You just said you think you know who it might be. I think Teddy may have crossed somebody connected to whatever people have been whispering about. Connected how? I don't know. What's it called? I don't know. Who's in charge? I don't know. Where are they based? I don't know. I stared at him, then laughed. You hear how ridiculous this sounds? Yes. And you believe it? Clay didn't smile. I believe somebody walked into my club, took control of my security system without touching my office, dealt with your son in front of a room full of people. He leaned forward. And by the next morning nobody wanted to remember his face. That shut me up. For a moment. Then I reached for my drink. I want the footage recovered. It can't be. Try. We have. Try harder. Clay's jaw tightened. And I want names. Staff. Guests. Everybody who was working that section. Rico. Somebody knows something. I'm telling you to leave this alone. And I'm telling you somebody touched my son. Your son may have brought it on himself. I know. That surprised him. I leaned forward. Teddy's an asshole. Clay almost smiled. I love him. The smile disappeared. But I'm not stupid. I picked up my glass. If he started it, I'll deal with Teddy. I took a slow drink. But first. I looked Clay directly in the eye. I'm going to find out who finished it. Clay stared at me for a long time. Then he shook his head. 5 years inside didn't teach you a damn thing. I smiled. It taught me patience. I finished the drink and stood. And right now? I placed the empty glass on his desk. I'm feeling very patient. The photographs had not done the Asta Cove justice. Not even close. By the time our car curved around the final bend of the long private drive, Biddy had already grabbed my arm hard enough to cut off circulation. Oh my God. I laughed. You've said that 6 times. I know, but look at it. I was looking. The resort sat high above the Atlantic, a sprawling collection of pale stone and weathered cedar surrounded by rolling lawns, hydrangeas and tall coastal grasses swaying gently in the breeze. Beyond it, nothing but blue. Ocean stretched across the horizon, glittering beneath the late morning sun. A wide stone terrace descended toward gardens and winding pathways that eventually disappeared toward a private beach below. It was beautiful, elegant without trying too hard, expensive without screaming about it, which probably meant it was catastrophically expensive. Biddy pressed closer to the window. I think this is it. You haven't even gotten out of the car. I don't need to. You're supposed to be evaluating it objectively. I am. You've been here 30 seconds. 30 very convincing seconds. I laughed as the car stopped beneath the covered entrance. By the time we checked into our suites and met the resort's wedding coordinator downstairs, Biddy had progressed from excited to completely unhinged. This is the East Lawn. I stopped. Kwang-su. Of course. The lawn swept toward the ocean, bordered by white hydrangeas and low stone walls. At the far end stood a simple wooden pavilion overlooking the water. Biddy turned slowly. Oh. I smiled. Apparently, this is the one you want. She looked at me. What? Kwang-su stayed here. Her eyes widened. Of course he has. Twice. Of course he is twice. I laughed. He said the western terrace has the better view, but the wind gets bad in the afternoon. The coordinator nodded immediately. He's absolutely right. It's spectacular, but for larger ceremonies we generally recommend this lawn. Biddy stared at me, then at the lawn, then back at me. Your boyfriend just became useful. He'll be thrilled. For the next hour, we wandered around the property while Biddy mentally planned and replanned her entire wedding. The pavilion, the gardens, the ballroom, a private dining room overlooking the water. She wanted photographs on the beach, then photographs in the vineyard. Then she discovered there was a sunset sail available for wedding parties and briefly considered putting everyone on a boat. What if someone gets seasick? I asked. They'll recover. Very compassionate. It's my wedding. We were discussing flowers on the terrace when Biddy suddenly grabbed my wrist. White roses. No. She stared at me. No. Too formal. Peonies. Better. Hydrangeas. I gestured toward the hundreds already surrounding us. Biddy, they're literally free. Her eyes widened. You're a genius. I'm an interior designer. Same thing. It absolutely is not. We were still laughing when I heard Eric behind us. There you are. Biddy turned. Baby, you need to see the East Lawn, because apparently Nessa's Billionaire has already conducted a full wind assessment. She stopped. So did I. Eric was walking toward us. And behind him, Donald. For one strange second, my brain refused to make sense of what I was seeing. Donald. Here. At the Asta Cove. Biddy's hand slowly dropped from my arm. What the hell is he doing here? Eric stopped dead. What? Biddy pointed. Donald. Eric turned around. The confusion on his face would have been funny under almost any other circumstances. Donald approached with a small overnight bag in one hand, looking almost irritatingly relaxed. Eric looked from him to me, then back again. Wait. His face changed. Oh shit. Eric, Biddy hissed. I didn't know. You invited him. I didn't invite him. Donald finally reached us. Hello, Nessa. I stared at him. Donald. Biddy looked ready to commit a felony. Eric lifted both hands. I swear to God, I didn't know he was coming. How do you not know who's coming on your own wedding reconnaissance trip? Biddy demanded. Paul canceled this morning. Eric continued quickly. His daughter got sick. He couldn't come. He said he will find somebody who could take the booking. I didn't know that somebody was Donald until he showed up. Biddy slowly turned toward Donald. And that somebody was you? Donald gave a mild shrug. Apparently. I almost rolled my eyes. Of course. Eric rubbed a hand over his face. Biddy looked at me. I'm so sorry. And that, more than anything else, settled me. Because she genuinely was. So was Eric. Nobody had engineered this. Nobody had decided I needed to spend 3 days trapped at a resort with my ex for some ridiculous attempt at reconciliation. It was simply bad luck. Donald looked between us. I didn't realize it would be a problem. Of course you didn't, Donald. For 10 years, Donald had possessed an extraordinary talent for creating uncomfortable situations and then standing in the middle of them looking genuinely surprised that anybody was uncomfortable. Biddy opened her mouth. I touched her arm. It's fine. She looked at me. Nessa. It's fine. And, surprisingly, I meant it. Not that I was happy to see him. I wasn't. But the sight of Donald no longer made my stomach drop. It didn't make me wonder what Cherry had that I didn't. It didn't send me spiraling through 10 years of memories, searching for the exact moment I'd stopped being enough. He was simply Donald. A man I'd once loved. A man who had hurt me. And a man I had finally moved beyond. I looked at him. You have your room? Just checked in. Good. I turned back to Biddy. Now? I pointed toward the gardens. You are having a crisis about peonies. She stared at me for a second, then slowly smiled. Hydrangeas. Right. The free hydrangeas. Eric visibly relaxed. Donald didn't. I noticed. I simply didn't care. Because this weekend wasn't about him. It was about Biddy. It was about champagne and flowers and ridiculous menu tastings and deciding whether putting 60 people on a sailboat constituted attempted murder. And I wasn't going to surrender 3 days at one of the most beautiful places I'd ever seen simply because my ex happened to be sleeping somewhere in the same resort. 6 months ago, maybe I would have. But I wasn't that woman anymore. So I linked my arm through Biddy's. Show me the ballroom. Her smile returned instantly. Wait until you see the chandeliers. We walked away, and for once, I didn't look back. By the time I finally dragged myself back to my oceanfront suite that evening, my legs felt like lead. Apparently, helping a bride inspect a luxury wedding resort involved significantly more mileage than I had mentally prepared for. In 8 hours, we had toured 2 cliffside ceremony lawns, 3 sprawling reception halls, the state-of-the-art spa, a private beach cove, the resort Vineyard, and something called the Ocean House, a glass pavilion Biddy had instantly declared essential for a farewell brunch she hadn't even known she wanted until approximately 4 minutes prior. My shoes were kicked off somewhere near the marble entryway. I was sprawled lazily across the king-size bed in a plush white bathrobe, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Kwang-su. A soft, helpless smile touched my lips before I even swiped the screen. Hello. You sound completely exhausted, his deep baritone rumbled over the line. I chuckled softly, my eyes fluttering shut. Hello to you too. Hello, sweet girl. My breath hitched just a fraction at the low, intimate tone of his voice. How was your day? Long. Mine too. Wedding planning? Tactical wedding reconnaissance. I corrected smoothly, rolling onto my back and staring up at the vaulted ceiling. Of course. I've acquired some deeply unsettling knowledge today, Kwang-su. Should I be concerned for my safety? Did you know there are approximately 17 distinct shades of white table linen? No. Neither did I. Fascinating data. Completely useless data. I sighed, burying my cheek into the soft down pillow. A low, quiet chuckle vibrated through the speaker, warm and soothing against my ear. God, I love that sound. How is the resort? He asked gently. Breathtaking. You were right about the East Lawn. I'm always right. Arrogant CEO. Accurate CEO. I let out a bright laugh. Biddy is obsessed with it. Though she's currently torn between the lawn and the garden pavilion because she's convinced the light hits the pavilion better for sunset photos. The East Lawn is superior, Kwang-su stated flatly, leaving zero room for debate. I'll inform the bride that the master strategist has made the executive decision. Please do not involve me in her floral crisis. Too late. You started this. A brief, comfortable silence settled over the line. I could hear the faint rustle of clothing and the soft click of a door on his end. Are you home? I asked quietly, my voice dropping into a softer register. Just walked through the door. A sudden, vivid image flashed in my mind. Kwang-su sliding off his tailored suit jacket, loosening his tie in the quiet, cavernous expanse of his Atlanta penthouse, all without me there to meet him. The thought made a sweet, aching heat coil in my chest. Then I remembered the ridiculous twist of the afternoon. Oh. You will never, in a million years, guess who pulled up to the resort today. There was barely a microsecond of pause on his end. Donald. I burst out laughing, pressing a hand over my eyes. How on earth did you know that? Your voice. My voice said, Donald. Your voice carried a very specific, exasperated sigh that only one man on this planet induces, he noted calmly. I shook my head against the pillow, smiling. Apparently one of Eric's groomsmen had an emergency this morning. His daughter came down with something, so he passed the room booking off to Donald. Did Eric orchestrate it? No. Eric looked like he was about to vomit when Donald walked up. Biddy nearly executed him on the spot before he could explain. I see. It genuinely was just cosmic bad luck. I believe you, Nessa. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing. No spike in his tone. No cold, possessive interrogation about where Donald's suite was located. No demands for me to check into a different hotel or pack my bags. Just absolute, immovable calm. That's it. I asked softly, testing the waters. What else should there be? I don't know. You aren't bothered? Is he bothering you? Kwang-su countered, his tone hardening just a fraction into that dangerous, protective edge I knew so well. No, I replied truthfully. Not at all. Then there isn't a problem. Simple. Unshakable. The absolute certainty of a man who knew my heart was completely in his hands. The tension melted entirely out of my shoulders. No, there isn't. Good. The conversation shifted naturally after that, flowing like warm water. He told me about a tedious board meeting that had dragged 40 minutes over schedule, because two senior VPs had nearly come to blows over budget allocations they didn't even have authority to sign off on. I complained dramatically about the tiny, artfully arranged portions at the resort's 5-course dinner tasting. He countered by reminding me that 5 small courses added up to a full meal, to which I informed him that logic had no place in fine dining. By the time we were ready to say goodnight, the thought of Donald hadn't crossed my mind in over an hour. Get some sleep, Kwang-su murmured, his voice low and heavy against the receiver. You too. Don't stay up working. A brief pause stretched across the line. The quiet rustle of his breath felt so close he might as well have been lying right beside me, his long arm wrapped around my waist. I miss you, he admitted softly. Raw. Unfiltered. My heart melted, a soft smile spreading across my face in the dark room. I miss you too, Kwang-su. So much. Good night, Nessa. Good night. The call disconnected, with a faint click. I plugged my phone into the charger on the nightstand, reached over to switch off the bedside lamp, and pulled the crisp white sheets up to my chin. Outside, through the slightly open balcony doors, the dark, rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves drifted gently into the room. Donald was sleeping somewhere in this massive resort. Kwang-su was hundreds of miles away in Atlanta. And strangely, wonderfully, neither fact gave me a single second of anxiety. Within minutes, wrapped in the warmth of Kwang-su's memory, I drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. Something was wrong with Biddy. I knew it within 30 seconds of sitting down. She was smiling too much. Not happy smiling. Guilty smiling. The kind of smile people wore when they knew something you didn't and were enjoying themselves far too much. I reached for the coffee pot. Why are you looking at me like that? Like what? That. I'm not looking at you in any kind of way. I narrowed my eyes. Across the table, Eric suddenly became deeply interested in buttering his toast. I looked at him. He looked away. Interesting. The resort's breakfast terrace was already busy, filled with guests enjoying the warm morning sunshine and spectacular view of the ocean. Our table sat near the edge of the terrace beneath a wide cream umbrella. Biddy was opposite me. Eric beside her. Donald sat farther down with the others. So far, he'd been perfectly civil, which suited me just fine. I poured coffee into my cup. What did you do? Biddy looked offended. Why does everyone always assume I did something? Experience. I haven't done anything. Then why are you acting weird? I'm not. Eric looked toward the entrance. Biddy immediately kicked him beneath the table. He winced. I slowly lowered my cup. What is going on? Nothing. Biddy. Eat your breakfast. Why? Because it's getting cold. It's fruit. She glanced down. Oh. Eric looked toward the entrance again. This time, I followed his gaze. And froze. For several seconds. I genuinely thought my brain was playing some kind of trick on me. Because walking calmly across the terrace in a dark polo shirt and tailored trousers was Kwang-su. I stared. He looked completely at ease, sunglasses tucked into one hand, his broad frame drawing several discreet glances as he crossed the terrace. His eyes found mine almost immediately. A faint smile touched his mouth. I looked at Biddy. She suddenly found the ocean fascinating. I looked back at Kwang-su. He reached the table. Good morning. Nobody answered. Mostly because I was still staring at him. Finally, what are you doing here? Having breakfast. Eric coughed into his coffee. Biddy looked down at her plate, shoulders shaking. I stared at Kwang-su. Having breakfast. Yes. On Martha's Vineyard. Yes. At my hotel. His eyebrow lifted slightly. Technically, it's a resort. I heard Biddy choke. Kwang-su. I missed you. That shut me up. Completely. He said it so simply. No dramatic declaration. No sheepish explanation for why he'd apparently travel hundreds of miles overnight. Just, I missed you. My heart did something embarrassingly soft inside my chest. When did you get here? About an hour ago. An hour ago? I shook my head, fighting a smile. You are ridiculous. So I've been told. Where are you staying? Here. You booked a room? A suite. Of course you booked a suite. Biddy finally lost the battle and laughed. I turned toward her. You knew? Only for about 10 minutes. And you said nothing? He told us not to. My head snapped back toward Kwang-su. I did not, he said. Eric nodded. He's right. He didn't. Biddy waved a hand. Fine. He didn't tell us not to. But I wanted to see your face. Traitor. Worth it. Kwang-su pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat down. Just like that. As though he had always been part of the table. I was still staring at him. He glanced at me. What? You flew all the way to Martha's Vineyard because you missed me? Yes. I've been gone one night. I know. A helpless laugh escaped me. You do realize I'm perfectly capable of spending 3 nights away from you. I know. And I wasn't remotely bothered by Donald being here. I know that too. There was no challenge in his voice. No suggestion that he'd come because he thought I needed protecting. He simply reached for the coffee pot. I watched him pour himself a cup. So this has nothing to do with Donald? His dark eyes met mine. I didn't say that. Biddy made a strangled sound across the table. I stared at him. Kwang-su. His expression remained perfectly calm. I missed you. There it was again. I couldn't even argue with him. Because he hadn't asked me to leave. He hadn't told Donald to leave. He hadn't interfered with Biddy's weekend or changed a single one of my plans. He'd simply decided that if I was going to spend the weekend on Martha's Vineyard. Apparently so was he. Possessive? Absolutely. Controlling? Not even slightly. And if the warm little thrill running through me was any indication, I wasn't particularly upset about it. A server approached the table. Good morning, sir. May I bring you a menu? Please. I leaned closer to Kwang-su. You know I'm still going to the spa with Biddy this afternoon. I assumed you would. And the wine tasting. Enjoy it. And whatever other ridiculous wedding activity she invents. Across the table, Biddy gasped. Excuse me? Kwang-su looked at me. Anything else? I fought back a smile. No. Good. He opened the menu. I shook my head. Then, unable to help myself, I leaned over and kissed his cheek. His eyes shifted toward me. Welcome to Martha's Vineyard. A slow smile touched his mouth. Thank you. And just like that, my girl's weekend had acquired a 6'3" Korean billionaire. Later that evening, the resort's wedding coordinator treated our table to an extravagant 6-course seafood feast overlooking the ocean. By the time dessert arrived, I was ready to throw in the towel. Between Biddy's endless venue notes, Eric's quiet suffering, and Donald's awkward presence at the far end of the terrace, my brain was completely fried. All night, Kwang-su had sat beside me like a cool, steady anchor, matching my subtle glances. The second dinner wrapped up, I leaned close to his ear. I want to see this suite you booked. The dark spark in his eyes told me he had been waiting for those exact words all night. 5 minutes later, the heavy double doors of his penthouse suite clicked shut behind us, and the ambient noise of the ocean terrace completely vanished. I barely had time to kick off my heels before Kwang-su took my wrist, spinning me gently around until my back was pressed flat against the dark wood of the entry door. The room was dim, illuminated only by the warm moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. He leaned in close, his towering frame completely blotting out the room, trapping me between the solid oak and 6'3" of pure, intoxicating heat. His breath, laced with fine scotch, brushed against the shell of my ear. I've been waiting all day to get you to myself, he murmured, his voice vibrating straight down my spine. I looked up, resting my palms flat against his chest. Have you now? I sat through 6 hours of venue tours, for flower arrangements and 3 separate linen discussions, he purred, his dark eyes gleaming as he looked down into mine. I'm very glad your wedding reconnaissance duties are officially paused for the night. A breathy laugh escaped my lips. You didn't have to trail along for all of it. Yes, I did. His thumb traced slowly across my lower lip. Because every time you looked over your shoulder, I wanted to remind you who was taking you home. He slid his hands down to my waist, his long fingers anchoring into my hips, pulling me firmly against him. I believe, Kwang-su whispered, his lips grazing the sensitive skin right beneath my jawline. You welcomed me to Martha's Vineyard at breakfast with a kiss on the cheek. My hand slid up his chest, wrapping around his neck, my fingers tangling in the soft dark hair at his nape. I did. His grip on my waist tightened, lifting me slightly onto my toes. Are you ready to really welcome me? He asked, his tone dropping into a low murmur. Kwang-su. Before I could finish my sentence, his mouth claimed mine with devastating authority. It wasn't the slow, gentle kiss from this morning. It was deep and electric. For a few breathless seconds. The rest of the weekend disappeared. The resort. The wedding. Donald. All of it. There was only Kwang-su. His hands around my waist. My fingers tangled in his hair. And the quiet certainty that neither of us intended to leave this suite again tonight. Somewhere beyond the windows, moonlight shimmered across the Atlantic. The waves rolled steadily against the shore. And as Kwang-su pulled me deeper into the darkened suite, the bedroom door quietly closed behind us. I had fully prepared myself for it to be unbearable. Watching Nessa with another man, a billionaire no less, was supposed to be a grueling exercise in swallowing my own pride. I had braced for the showy, performative display, the grand gestures, the desperate need to prove to me how wildly happy she was now. But what I hadn't prepared for was how quiet, effortless, and terrifyingly normal they were together. The weekend moved forward as if my awkward, unexpected arrival had barely registered as a blip on their radar. Biddy threw herself into venue scouting with terrifying, drill sergeant enthusiasm. Every picturesque corner of the estate was a potential photo op. Every menu required a full tasting. Every arrangement of coastal flora contained deep, cosmic significance. I found myself trailing behind the main group through manicured grounds, sunlit private beaches, and cliffside vineyards overlooking the Atlantic, genuinely wondering how sane adults could spend this kind of money on a single afternoon. Eric, to his credit, looked equally shell-shocked. I thought we'd already chosen the menu. We had. So why are we tasting another one? Because this one has different potatoes. Eric looked at me. I don't know what that means either. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped me. At least I wasn't the only man drowning in wedding logistics. The venue coordinator guided us onto the sweeping velvet expanse of the East Lawn. This is our signature ceremony setting. Biddy sighed, her eyes sparkling. It's perfection. It really is, Nessa admitted softly, taking in the cliffside view. The wedding coordinator led us across the eastern lawn. This is one of our most requested ceremony locations. Biddy sighed happily. I love it. So do I, Nessa admitted. The coordinator smiled. Your boyfriend recommended this area. I looked across at Kwang-su. You've been here before? Twice. Biddy laughed. He also warned us not to use the western terrace. The coordinator nodded. The afternoon winds can become surprisingly strong. I frowned. He'd remembered that. It was a strange thing to notice. An even stranger thing to remember. As the tour dragged on, covering photography angles, ballroom acoustics, guest villa placements, and spa packages, I realized I'd stopped evaluating the resort altogether. I was watching them. It wasn't because they were putting on a show. They weren't hanging off each other or groping each other in corners. In fact, they barely touched. That was what threw me off completely. I'd expected dramatic hand-holding, lingering kisses under the sun, subtle glances in my direction to twist the knife, the obvious, insecure theater of a couple trying to make an ex jealous. Instead, they simply existed in the same physical space with absolute, unshakable ease. At lunch, as the sommelier poured a crisp Sauvignon Blanc, Nessa reached for her glass with a light smile. The group was mid-conversation, laughing about university days. Without interrupting the conversation or even turning his head, Kwang-su smoothly reached out, took the wine glass directly from her fingers, and set a chilled glass of sparkling water in its place. Nessa blinked down at her hands, frowning. Hey, I wasn't finished with that. You were? Kwang-su noted calmly, taking a sip of his own drink. I still had half a glass left. You have the 70-foot sailing excursion in 45 minutes. And? You told me boats and a second glass of wine don't mix. She stared up at him, her lips parting. I mentioned that to you once. 6 weeks ago. You remembered? Yes. That was it. No debate. No defensive posturing. No petty argument. He had simply stored a minor detail about her body's limits 6 weeks ago, and acted on it with quiet, absolute authority to protect her from being miserable later. I stared down at my untouched plate, a cold knot twisting in my gut. 10 years. I had spent 10 full years with Nessa. And, if you put a gun to my head right now, I couldn't have told you how many glasses of wine it took to make her seasick. Later, while walking through the shaded rows of the resort vineyard, I kept my distance, watching from a few paces back. As the group picked up the pace, Kwang-su's hand brushed lightly against hers. Just a brief, fleeting touch of their knuckles. Neither of them looked down. Neither of them paused. Their fingers simply found each other. Effortlessly. As though they'd done it 1,000 times before. It wasn't romantic. It was habit. That evening, dinner was served on the private ocean terrace under a canopy of strings lights. The atmosphere was warm, washed in fine wine and easy laughter. Halfway through the main course, Nessa casually leaned over and used her fork to steal a crispy roasted potato directly off Kwang-su's plate. I waited for him to react, to make a joke, to lightly scold her, to guard his food the way most men do. He didn't even blink. Without dropping his thread of conversation with Eric, Kwang-su sliced a tender portion of roasted asparagus from his own plate and smoothly transferred it to hers. Nessa offered a sweet, triumphant smile. "How generous of you. You looked dissatisfied with your greens," he murmured, his thumb briefly grazing the back of her wrist. "I was. I know. You always know." "Usually, yes." Biddy let out a loud laugh, shaking her head. "I swear you two have your own language." "I don't think they even realize they're doing it half the time," Eric added. "I really don't," Nessa admitted. Everyone laughed. Except me. Because a suffocating, deeply uncomfortable truth was settling like lead in my chest. They weren't acting. There was no performance for my benefit. No hidden agenda. No desperate need to win a breakup. They simply belonged together. I stared across the candlelit table at the woman I had discarded, trying to reconcile the image in front of me with the memory in my head. I had spent a decade with Nessa. 10 years of shared residence, dry cleaning, routine coffee orders, and predictable dinners. I knew her favorite restaurants. I knew she slept on the left side of the mattress. I could still predict what she'd order off a menu in half the steakhouses in Atlanta. I'd spent a decade believing that meant I knew her inside and out. So why? Why did it feel like this man, who had stepped into her life only a few short months ago, understood the actual rhythm of her soul in ways I'd never even bothered to look for? I watched her lean her head back, laughing freely at something Biddy said, her eyes shining in the candlelight. Kwang-su didn't jump in to steal the spotlight. He didn't talk over her. He simply sat back, one long arm resting over the back of her chair, watching her with a quiet, fierce, unshakable reverence. Content to simply let her shine. A cold, brutal thought settled heavy in my chest. One that made my mouth dry and my hands cold. Maybe I had never actually known Nessa at all. Maybe I had just been living in the same house with a woman I was too blind to ever truly see. And maybe that should have been enough for me to finally let her go. I looked across the table again, at her smile, at his hand resting behind her chair, at the ease between them that I couldn't explain. It should have been enough. It wasn't, because somewhere between watching them laugh and realizing how completely she'd moved on, I made a decision. Before this weekend was over, I was going to find out exactly who Kwang-su really was.